Why is the river so quiet tonight?
I've lived here all my life. I've never seen it like this.
Elder, what does it mean?
It means something has awakened.
No. What's wrong? Those eyes.
The river has chosen.
No! This is abomination!
Go and get that child. That child is not meant to be in this village.
Bring the child.
This is Tales by Sombaby, where the voice of Africa lives on, and every story holds a truth.
There's a river in a Nigerian village that has never once lied. It does not rise for the wicked. It does not sleep through cruelty. And on one particular night, it did something it had never done before. It stopped completely. No ripple, no sound. Just silence stretching across the water like held breath. That night, a child was born who the elders said should not survive till morning. They were wrong. What that river chose to protect would grow into something Amaedike could never undo, never outrun, and never forget. This is that story. And by the end, you'll understand why they say the river never releases what it loves. The night Adaeze was born, something in Amaedike broke its own rhythm. The wind, which always moved through the palm trees at dusk, simply stopped, as though the whole village had been told to hold its breath. Birds that nested along the riverbank went quiet mid-flight. Dogs that barked at every shadow lay still in the dirt, ears flat, eyes wide. And the river that had rushed and churned and sung its way through Amaedike since before anyone could remember, lay flat and silent like glass laid over the earth. The midwife who caught the baby froze the moment she saw her face. White hair, fine as spun cotton, framed a small head, but it was the eyes that made her step back. Deep blue, the color of water no man in Amaedike had ever swum through, stared back at her, calm in a way no newborn's eyes should be. Word spread before sunrise. The elders gathered beneath the ancient Iroko tree, murmuring words no mother wants to hear about her child. They called it an omen, a warning, a curse wrapped in skin. They said she should not be kept past nightfall because whatever had entered Amaedike through her had not come to bless it. Ijeoma, the child's mother, sat in her hut with her daughter against her chest and listened to the fear moving through the village like smoke under a door. She did not believe what they believed. She looked at her daughter's eyes and did not see a curse. She saw a river.
By the time the moon had climbed fully into the sky, Ijeoma had made her decision. She wrapped her daughter in the softest cloth she owned, tucked her into a woven basket lined with plantain leaves, and slipped out of her hut without waking anyone. Her feet found the familiar path to the riverbank easily, even in darkness. She had walked it 1,000 times as a girl, fetching water, washing cloth, listening to the old women warn children never to swim past the bend where the current turned strange. That was where Ohamiri lived, they said, the river goddess, the spirit who had watched over Amaedike since the first hut was built, who took what the village couldn't protect and gave back what the village didn't expect. Ijeoma knelt at the water's edge with the basket trembling in her arms. She did not pray for mercy. She prayed for exchange, her daughter's life for whatever price the river demanded. Then, before her courage could fail her, she set the basket on the water and pushed it gently toward the current. She watched it drift, watched the water part around it like it recognized what it was carrying, and then she watched it disappear around the bend where no one was supposed to follow. Ijeoma did not cry until she was back inside her hut, alone, with empty arms and a silence in her chest louder than anything the village elders had said that day. Beneath the water, something ancient had already begun to stir. Ohamiri had felt the child before she ever touched the river's surface, felt the pull of a life marked the same way the water itself was marked, old and deep, and impossible to explain in the language of men. When the basket reached her, she did not see a curse floating toward her. She saw a daughter the river had been waiting generations for. She lifted the child from the basket with hands made of current and moonlight, and the baby did not cry. She simply opened her blue eyes and looked at the goddess the way the river looks at the sky, like it already belonged to her. Ohamiri kept the child for a long time beneath the water, in a world where time did not move the way it did above. She taught her nothing yet, because there was nothing to teach an infant, but she gave her something instead. A smooth blue stone, glowing faintly like trapped starlight, which she fastened around her baby's neck on a cord of woven river reed. It was not decoration, it was a tether, a promise, a piece of the river's own power made small enough to wear. When the time came, Ohamiri did not keep her. She sent the basket downstream again, past villages that would never know what had drifted through their waters, until it reached a bend where a woman named Nkechi knelt every morning, praying to any god who would listen for a child of her own. Nkechi had prayed for years without an answer, and when she found the basket caught in the reeds that morning, she nearly convinced herself she was imagining it. But the baby was real, warm, blinking up at her with eyes like river water, a strange blue stone resting against her small chest. Nkechi did not ask where the child had come from. She simply lifted her out of the basket, held her close, and decided in that instant that whatever this child was, she was hers now. She named her Adaeze, a name meaning daughter of a king, though she couldn't have known then how fitting it would one day become. For the first few years, there was real tenderness in that house. Nkechi sang to her, fed her, protected her from the whispers that inevitably followed a child with hair like foam and eyes like deep water. But households change when new children arrive, and Nkechi's did not stay simple for long. Not long after finding Adaeze, Nkechi discovered she was pregnant after years of believing she never would be. She gave birth to a daughter of her own blood, a girl she named Chidimma. From the moment Chidimma was born, something in Nkechi's heart quietly rearranged itself, and Adaeze, the river's child, the one she had raised out of desperate love, began slowly, and then not so slowly, to slide down the list of who mattered in that house. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way water erodes stone, patient, invisible, until one day the shape of things had changed. By the time the girls were old enough to understand what a family was supposed to feel like, Adaeze already understood that she wasn't quite in one. Chidimma grew up soft-handed and doted on, dressed in the best cloth Nkechi could afford, praised for things Adaeze did just as well, but received no praise for. Adaeze, meanwhile, learned to fetch water before sunrise, to cook meals she wasn't always allowed to eat first, and to sleep on a mat near the door instead of beside the family fire. She never spoke of it. She had learnt early that complaining only made Nkechi's eyes go cold, and cold was worse than tired. So she carried baskets on her head that were too heavy for a girl her age, and she smiled when she was told to, and she kept the blue stone tucked beneath her wrapper where no one would ask questions about it.
As the years passed, what had started as simple favoritism hardened into something crueler. Chidima, watching her mother's coldness toward Adaeze, learned to mirror it, then to amplify it. She mocked Adaeze's white hair in front of other children, called her river-touched, in a tone that made it sound like a disease rather than a wonder. Nkechi, for her part, stopped pretending their affection had ever been equal. Small punishments became routine, meals withheld, chores multiplied, blame assigned for things Adaeze hadn't done. Adaeze absorbed it all the way the riverbank absorbs rain, quietly, without complaint, waiting for a season that hadn't come yet. She didn't know that somewhere beneath the water she'd been pulled from, something ancient was still watching, still keeping count of every unkindness done to a child it considered its own. The cruelty that had simmered for years finally boiled over on an afternoon that started like any other. Chidima, now grown into a young woman, as sharp-tongued as she was pretty, had grown tired of sharing a household with a girl she'd always seen as a servant wearing her sister's face. Nkechi, for reasons she told herself were practical rather than cruel, had decided enough was enough. Adaeze was no blood of theirs. She had eaten their food, worn their old cloth, taken up space in their home for 17 years, and it was time they agreed quietly between themselves that she stopped. They didn't plan to simply send her away. They planned to be rid of her for good, in a manner that would leave no questions and no witnesses. They lured her to the riverbank under the pretense of washing cloth, the same stretch of water Ijeoma had once knelt beside with a basket and a prayer. Adaeze went without suspicion. She had never been given reason to doubt them, not out loud, not where it mattered. It was only when Chidima's hands found her shoulders and shoved that she understood what was happening, and by then it was already too late to fight it. She fell backward into the current, and in the struggle, the cord around her neck snapped. The blue stone, the tether to everything Uhamiri had given her at birth, slipped from her throat and sank into the dark water without her. Adaeze went under without it, and for the first time since the night she was born, she was completely unprotected. The river does not forget, and it does not forgive quietly. The moment the stone touched the riverbed, something shifted beneath Amaedike that no one above the water could see coming. Uhamiri rose, not gently, not the way she had risen to accept a frightened mother's basket 17 years before, but in her full and terrible form, water giving shape and fury, ancient in a way that made the ground itself seem to tremble. She had watched every small cruelty done to the child she'd claimed as her own, had counted every withheld meal and every cold word, and she had waited because the river is patient even when it is angry. But this was the line that could not be uncrossed. They had taken the daughter she loved and thrown her back into the water like refuse. By the next morning, the wells across Amaedike went dry. Streams that had run for generations shrank to cracked mud within a single day. The river itself pulled back from its banks as though recoiling from the village that lined them, leaving fishing boats stranded on bare earth and women standing at empty washing spots with baskets they no longer had water to fill. The elders who had once called Adaeze cursed now stood at the edge of a dying river, finally understanding, far too late, exactly what kind of power they'd spent 17 years mistreating. Amaedike had built its whole life around water it assumed would always be there. Now it was learning, in the cruelest way possible, what it meant to lose the favor of something ancient. Downstream, where the current had carried her, Adaeze did not drown. The same water that had taken everything from her that day also refused to let her go completely. Some remnant of Uhamiri's old protection still moved through her blood, even without the stone, slowing her fall, softening the current around her body, until she washed ashore, bruised and gasping, on a bank far from the home that had tried to erase her. It was there that fate, or perhaps the river itself, arranged one final act of return. Ijeoma, her birth mother, who had never stopped walking the river banks over the years, who had never stopped hoping the water might one day give back what she'd surrendered, found her lying in the mud, alive, marked with the same blue-tinted eyes she remembered from the night she'd given her away. The reunion was not loud. It was quiet, disbelieving, the kind of moment too large for immediate words. Ijeoma knelt beside the daughter she hadn't held in 17 years and simply wept. And Adaeze, weak and confused and aching, understood without being told exactly who this woman was. Something in her recognized the shape of that grief as her own. Over the following days, Ijeoma told her everything. The forbidden night, the elders' warnings, the desperate walk to the river, the daughter she'd given up so she might live. And slowly, piece by piece, Adaeze began to understand that she had never been cursed at all. She had simply been loved by something the village never had the courage to understand. With her birth mother beside her, Adaeze made her way back toward the river, toward the place where the blue stone had sunk into the dark. The water, still furious, still withholding itself from a village choking on its own drought, parted for her the moment she stepped in, as though it had simply been waiting for her to come home. She found the stone resting exactly where it had fallen, glowing faintly beneath the surface, and when her fingers closed around it, she felt something in her chest wake up fully for the first time. Power that had been half asleep her entire life now surging through her completely awake. Ohamiri rose once more, not in fury this time, but in recognition, and the two of them stood together, goddess and daughter, while the village watched from a dry and desperate distance. News of what had happened to Adaeze spread through Amaedike faster than the drought itself. Nkechi and Chidinma, once so certain of their place in that household, found themselves suddenly without protection, without the daughter whose labor had quietly held their lives together, and without any way to explain themselves to a village now terrified of the power they had spent years abusing. They did not stay in Amaedike much longer. Whatever became of them afterwards, the village stopped speaking their names, the way people stop speaking of things they are ashamed to have witnessed. Adaeze, meanwhile, stood at the center of it all, not as a cursed child anymore, but as something the entire village now understood it had never truly seen clearly. What came after was the kind of ending the old stories always promised but rarely delivered. Adaeze, restored to her full self, caught the attention of Prince Kelechi, a man who had heard the whispers about the river-marked girl and come to see for himself whether they were true. He found not a curse, but a woman shaped by water and hardship into something rare, calm, powerful, unwilling to be diminished by a village that once tried to erase her. Their courtship was brief, because there was little need for the usual hesitations. Something about the way the river circled whenever she was near told him everything he needed to know. When they married, Ohamiri herself seemed to bless the union, and for the first time since the night Adaeze was pushed beneath the water, the river began to return to its banks. The wells filled again, the streams ran clear. Amaedike, humbled and quietly grateful, learned to speak of the river with a new kind of respect, one built from fear, now settled into reverence. Adaeze never forgot what was done to her, but she also never let it harden her the way it might have. She had been raised by cruelty and saved by water, and in the end, both of those things shaped her into exactly what the river had always known she would become. Some children, the elders finally admitted years later, are not cursed. They are simply too powerful for the world they are born into. And the river, patient and ancient and remembering everything, always knows the difference, and it never releases what it truly